Hey BookTube, what's up? My name is Juan. I am just one reader. You know who I am. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am really excited because I just finished reading a book that I think might be my favorite book that I have read so far in 2017. I'm still not sure if it actually is like my top number one book of the year, but it's definitely a big contender. It's definitely right there at the top right now with the rest of the 5-star rated books that I've read so far this year. So yeah, I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars. And you know, I'm very stingy with my 5-star rating, so that just goes to tell you just how great I thought this book is. So the book in question is Fortune Smiles. It's a collection of stories by Adam Johnson, and you will notice that I said stories, just stories, not short stories. And this is kind of a big deal because these stories are long. They're quite longer than you would expect from your typical short story collection. I think the shortest story in this collection might be around 35 pages long, and the longest might be around 60 or 70 pages long. So they feel like fully realized long entities by themselves. Now, a little bit of background on the author, the genius that is Adam Johnson. And I will try my best to contain myself and not ramble too much. So Adam Johnson won, I think he has published 4 books, but something that is really important is that he won the Pulitzer Prize. I don't know when, but he won the Pulitzer Prize for his novel The Orphan Master's Son, which I haven't read, but I have bought it, and I haven't received it, but I already bought it. As soon as I finished this, I immediately placed my order, and I also bought everything that he has published because this man can write. So he won the Pulitzer Prize for that novel. I've heard that novel is really intense and really weird and really crazy. It's about North Korea and this totalitarian regime, and it's about this man who is, I think, trying to escape or something like that. But yeah, we're not focusing on that novel. We're focusing in this collection. So he won the Pulitzer Prize for that novel. And then after that, in 2015, he published Fortune Smiles, this collection of stories. And he won, again, a bunch of different awards, prizes, recognition everywhere, a lot of accolades. And most prominently, he won the National Book Award for fiction in 2015. So that's a big deal. It is a big deal for a collection of stories to win such a prize. Now, before I get into the whole review and whether I think you should read this book or not, I would like to tell you a little bit about how I came across this book in the first place and how it was that I picked it up and decided to read it. So I had not been a big short story collection or short story reader up until last year, I think 2016 it was, that I started to read more short stories, and in particular short story collections. I remember that I read Magic for Beginners by Kelly Link. I read Ramona Ossobel's A Guide to Being Born. I read a couple of short stories in 2016, but then something kind of wonderful happened at the end of the year. I read George Saunders' 10th of December, which is a very famous, very acclaimed short story collection that he published a couple of years ago, and I fell in love with him as an author. I fell in love with his writing, but I fell in love, more importantly, I fell in love with the form of the short story. And that book, by the way, 10th of December, became my favorite book of 2016. I adored it. It was such an amazing experience. It was a wonderful gift to read that book. So ever since then, ever since I read that particular collection, I've been on the lookout for more collections like that or similar to that, or that people compare for some reason or another to that type of experience. And one day I was watching Ryan, who is one of my favorite booktubers, although he hasn't been uploading videos in quite some time. But he has a channel. It's For the Love of Ryan, I think. For the Love of Ryan, yeah. And he made a review for Fortune Smiles by Adam Johnson. And then, I started to investigate more about this book and this author. And there were a lot of people that compared him and his style to George Saunders. I remember that Ryan in particular said that Adam Johnson to him felt like a combination of Kurt Vonnegut and Saunders. I haven't read Kurt Vonnegut, but I've always been attracted to his books, and I own a copy of Slaughterhouse-Five that I will hopefully read eventually once I once I conquer my intimidation that I have for that book. But yeah, so I decided that this sounded really cool because of that reference of, being similar to George Saunders and having won the Pulitzer for his novel and everything. So I picked it up. Now, I should tell you that, yes, you should read this. Before I tell you all the reasons, I'm just gonna give it all away. Yes, you should read this book. This is a book that I think is very recommendable, and you should at least try reading these stories, because I think you can't go wrong with this collection. That's how great I think it is. I think there is something of value to be found here in these stories, in these pages, for literally everybody, for any type of reader. I think you will find something in here. Something great about these stories is that they are genre bending or genre defying. I mean, you could say, if you had to, I think you would say that they are literary fiction, but they have elements of everything, of every genre. So it's very hard to classify them or to put them into a category. You just have to roll with it and enjoy them and be open to the punches that Adam Johnson throws at you, because it's such an experience. Now, like I said, there are only 6 stories in this collection, so it's a somewhat unusual collection, because most short story collections, A, they have more stories, and B, their stories are far shorter. And this one has only 6, and they are significantly longer than you would expect or from your average collection. So you would expect, somewhat ill-advisedly, you would expect that this is a light collection. It's anything but light. The reading experience that you get from this book is crazy. It is a roller coaster. You literally go through every emotion in the spectrum. You are feeling everything. It usually focuses more on sadness, depression, loss, death. It has some important existentialist questions and things that have to do with identity and yeah, very difficult life situations and coping with loss and with death and with stress and anxiety and various things. So it can be upsetting, and it kind of has that depressive quality to it, but it's also really funny, very uplifting, hopeful and human and beautiful and powerful and relentless, and it really packs a punch. It's really impactful. So in that regard, it's very similar to George Saunders, in the way that it addresses these really hard-hitting topics and themes that are both individual and universal. And he tackles them with a lot of humor and with really ingenious, clever, inventive devices, and he focuses on characters that are usually voiceless or that are not seen enough in literature, that we don't usually see in books, really. Like, my favorite story in here is about a pedophile, and we follow him, and we are literally inside his mind and his consciousness, his train of thought, so we get to experience all his fantasies, the way that he copes with his urges and anxieties. And it could be, it sounds like it could potentially be an awful experience, but it's so well done and so well crafted. That story alone is absolutely fabulous. And well, there's not a single story in here that is not worth your time. They are all 6 perfect gems. So my conclusion of Fortune Smiles by Adam Johnson, this is a fantastic read. It's one of the best books that I've read this year, if not my favorite book of the year so far. I kind of have to let it sink, let it simmer, and the test of time will decide what's my favorite book of the year. But so far, I think this one really, really takes that golden spot. It's amazing. It's well written. Like I said, it's very similar to George Saunders, but it's similar enough so that if you enjoy George Saunders or something like George Saunders, you would enjoy it. But it's unique and special and specific enough to, like, a creation of Adam Johnson, that you will never be you won't be constantly comparing it to other things. This is just kind of a special thing, and it's very very much an entity of its own. So don't worry, you will not make comparisons to other works very much. This is a book that really stands by itself. It stands on its own. I think it's a masterpiece of the short story the short story format, or story format. And I know I haven't read a lot to be saying this big of a statement. I haven't read enough short stories to be saying this, but there's just something in there in the writing that intuitively I can feel is very special and very unique. And if you enjoy the type of stories that I have read and reviewed on my channel, like Magic for Beginners, like Kelly Link or George Saunders, or well, the kind of stuff that I usually review, particularly in short story format. If you go to my review of the best American short stories, which I reviewed this year, you will see my taste for short stories. So if you enjoy that kind of thing, go ahead and try this. But even if you don't like the same things that I like, I still feel like this is a book that everybody should try, everybody should read, because it's a unique experience, really unique experience. It's well done. Like, I could not picture this being any better. An example of this is that every single story in here could be, it could give you enough material to write a full novel. That's how great it is. And you're kind of left wanting more of each story, of every character and of every universe. So yeah, this is a story that portrays really interesting, not always positive characters in settings that are really outlandish and inventive and well realized, that feel like our own world, but slightly tweaked, slightly changed for some reason. And it's just a feat of imagination and an accomplishment of technique. So go ahead and read it and tell me, have you read this book? Do you want to read this book? What do you want to say? Thank you very much for watching. That was my review for Adam Johnson's Fortune Smiles.